Piccolo Coffee Bar, Sydney's King's Cross. You can still find jazz records on the jukebox and see faces of the 1950s Bohemia. Jazz musos hung out here after a job, along with black dancers from the strip clubs, intellectual refugees from Europe, crims, desperates. Sometimes Bumper Farrell's Vice Squad would rush in here, smell your coffee, see if you got whiskey in it. If you didn't, they'd help you out and bust you. Nice guys. Australia was what you might say a little isolated in the 50s, and modern jazz, well, that was something very different. Sort of subterranean. Hidden away from the sideshows and dance halls that flourished in a little backstreet cellar at the heart of King's Cross, the old Rocco. Probably the first club in Australia that existed purely to present modern jazz. Often wondered what drew us here when the official language of rebellious youth was rock and roll. Clive James said the most daring thing you could do in the late 50s, early 60s was to hear Errol Buddle here at the old Rocco. Bit more to it than that for some of us, Clive. For some, the appeal was purely musical. Others got caught up in the mystique. But either way, our suits were hip. And to be hip means you had to have, or believe you have, esoteric knowledge not shared by the mainstream. You dig what I'm putting down, man?
My first memory of the El Rocco at King's Cross was, well, a mixture of feelings. I'd never, ever seen anything like it. Come to think of it, I'd never heard anything like the music in it. I was both fascinated, intrigued, and slightly terrified at the same time. It was the nearest thing to a den of iniquity. I shouldn't say that, because it turned out to be quite a respectable coffee house.
It was the worst coffee in Sydney. It was Nescafe. People paid some money to come in and just sit. So you had to be dedicated kind of to go there. The audience were... There was nothing but this wretched coffee and the music.
The atmosphere of the room, the El Rocco, changed with each group and with the crowd. It was like an artist's painting. It depends what paint they put on that board on that day. And the reaction was instantaneous. Sometimes you'd get creativity in that room, which you couldn't do in a recording studio. It was spontaneous.
whilst there's always been some amount of clubs around, there wasn't one that gave the opportunity that the El Rocco gave when it opened. And I think it was because there was no restriction on the musicians, on what they played. I remember when I was doing TV shows, like a lot of us were, you know, Graham Lyle, Errol Buddle, if we weren't actually on the night playing at the El Rocco, we would always drive as fast as we could back to the El Rocco just to catch the last set of somebody else.
The mood in that room, sometimes when the musicians were playing, the waitresses couldn't even serve coffee. You could hear a pin drop. The customers, they weren't allowed to talk, virtually. It made it unique, you know, and this is what impressed people from overseas.
The music that was being accepted by the average Sydney listener could be referred to as a gentleman's jazz. Pale, white music. Certainly had the beat, had the melodies, had improvisation, which generally was repetitive improvisation. But the people liked it because collectively they could hear the sound that came off the stand, they could talk to it, they could enjoy the atmosphere and say, and applaud greatly at the end of it and say, wonderful atmosphere, wonderful music, aren't they great?